When it first came out, most of the first reviews of it couldn't have got it more wrong. I think my favourite comment is by the reviewer in the Times Literary Supplement, 25th November 1955, who nailed his colours to the mast. He said, "This is not a work that many adults will read right through more than once." Well, that must have seemed a safe bet at the time, because it's 1,200 pages long, and you wouldn't expect many people to read it right through more than once. But actually, of course, they have. It is a book which has been read through by an enormous number of adults, many more times than once. Another classic, I think, really, again, a book when people might possibly have learnt better. This book says, talking in a very advanced critical language, that The Lord of the Rings is over-coded because the megatext has to be constantly explained. Well, leave that aside. But it goes on to say, "Nor are the histories and genealogies in the least necessary to the narrative, but they have given much infantile happiness to the Tolkien clubs and societies." Well, that's just name-calling, infantile happiness. But when somebody says the histories and genealogies are not in the least necessary to the narrative, now that's dead wrong. That's not only wrong, that's stupidly wrong. Actually, what they give to the narrative is something which Tolkien was very aware of, and which he often talked and wrote about, and which he valued very much, and that is depth. So you don't just have, as it were, a flat, garish, shiny surface. You have something which has depth behind it, and a feeling that this is a world where you can ask a question about it, and you'll get an answer. And if you ask a question about the question, or a question about the answer, then you'll get more answers, because it's all there already. And that gives you an illusion of reality. But the illusion has been deliberately created.
The critics were varied in their reaction to The Lord of the Rings. Among the condemnations, there were some significant good reviews. Bernard Levin wrote that it would be impossible to do justice to this magnificent book. To begin with, the learning is prodigious. But why did some of the critics get it so wrong?
I would think that they read it right, and they realized what it was trying to do, and then they realized they didn't like that, so they denied their own response. And that, I think, is the worst thing a critic can do, when you know it in your heart, but then you think, I'm going to suppress this because it is giving an answer which I didn't expect and I don't like. So I think there was a kind of a self-censorship there. I think that one thing is that there's a kind of ideological opposition. That Tolkien, in a way, was sticking up for the past, and not just the far remote past, but also actually the near past. Perhaps we're going back to the First World War again. After the First World War, the dominant literary response to everything was irony. Now, Tolkien was capable of irony, but he did not actually write in an ironic mode. Actually, I think he was writing in a romantic mode. And that mode, they thought, had, that mode, should we say, the critics thought, the academic world thought, had actually been completely drained. It had finished. You couldn't do it again. And here's somebody coming along, insisting on doing something again, which they thought they'd buried. But he resurrected it. Well, that couldn't be allowed, and so the feeling was, this is a success, but we're not going to admit that. We're going to say it's a failure because on our little plan of literary genres, it ought to be a failure. You can't do things like that anymore.
People are various, and tastes differ, and not everybody's going to like the same thing. I don't recommend The Lord of the Rings to people, because I'd rather have them discover it, and because I'm not sure, until I know somebody very well, whether they're going to like it or not. You know, Tolkien wrote an essay on Beowulf, in which he took on all the people who were embarrassed at the fact that Beowulf was about a man who fought dragons, and dismissed it as a fairy story, because they were slightly uneasy with the idea that a grown-up person would write or sing or be involved in such a story. And I think there's still a lot of people who would have that response. And for those people, that's not their book. And for people who like that sort of thing, that's the sort of thing they like.
Among the people who definitely did not like Tolkien's book were many of his fellow academics, and this attitude prevails today.
The academic reaction has been, I think, comically bad. I can understand people saying, I don't like this book, and I don't think anybody should like this book. That makes sense. But from the moment The Lord of the Rings was published, you got people saying, I don't like this book, and nobody else does either. And that's just not true. You can say, I don't like it, and anybody who does like it is an idiot. That's understandable. But then you've got to explain why there are so many people like that. And actually, it would be a better idea to try to explain why it was successful. But actually, there's been very strong aversion, as I say, to doing that. There were people who are reading the book and then averting their eyes and talking about some other book they thought they might have read. But they disliked it so much they couldn't watch it. They couldn't see it clearly. Now that, I think, was quite an interesting reaction. If you create that reaction in people, you have, so to speak, hit them on the funny bone. And you then wonder quite, how he managed to do that.